So, what is the Bank for International Settlements? Well, I always say it's the most important bank in the world that you've probably never heard of. Most people have never heard of the BIS, apart from people who are dealing with, the more technical side of central banking or international finance. So, the BIS was set up in 1930, and it was set up as part of the Young Plan. Its history reaches back to the end of the First World War, and after the Germans lost, they were punished by being forced to pay reparations. And there was a lot of arguments about these reparations. How much would they pay? How long would they go on for? And what happened was the Allied powers agreed that through the Young Plan, the BIS would be set up to collect and administer and manage these reparations payments. So it was set up for a really kind of obscure basis. This was not a big geopolitical question at the time of German reparations for the First World War. But the real reason it was set up was so that central bankers, i.e. the governors of national banks like the Bank of France, the Bank of England and the Federal Reserve and so on, could have a place to meet that was supremely protected and legally inviolable. What does that mean? That means that the BIS is an international organization, but it's also a commercial bank. It's a unique hybrid in the world. It's the world's oldest global financial institution. It was set up before the IMF and before the World Bank. But it's got, as a commercial bank, it's got a mission and a duty to make a profit, but it's got all of the same protections, or almost all, as the United Nations or the International Monetary Fund. So from the moment it was set up by an international treaty, the BIS's premises is almost extraterritorial. The Swiss authorities have no jurisdiction over it, same as the American embassy or the British embassy anywhere does, has that level of protection. And during the 1930s, the BIS became a place where the central bankers could meet and discuss things away from politicians and away from the eyes of reporters. And in fact, during the 30s, the bank was so secretive that there was a New York Times reporter who went out to Basel to do a big piece on the BIS, a big takeout for the magazine as it was then. And he got into the building and he said, after the directors' meeting, he wasn't even allowed into the room when they'd all gone because the space was so protected and so sacred. So I think that's very interesting, because what it tells us is, if you've ever wondered how we got to this place where all these people from the IMF and the ECB and the World Bank and whatever are flying around the world, if you look at Greece, for example, I mean, how did we get here that these kind of unelected technocrats are telling everyone and telling elected governments what to do? My argument is that all this started at the BIS, which was the first place, the birthplace of the global financial technocrat. And the BIS, the two people who really worked to set up the BIS were a man called Montague Norman, who was the governor of the Bank of England, 1920 to 1944, and Hjalmar Schacht, who was the president of the Reichsbank. And they were very close friends. And they were really the two most powerful central bankers in the world at the time. I mean, Montague Norman could come to New York, make a speech, all doom and gloom, the market would go down. Come to New York, make a speech, everything's going well, the market would go up. These were the market movers. And then it takes a rather more sinister turn, because during the 1930s, Hjalmar Schacht also continued serving as president of the Reichsbank under Hitler, and it is generally agreed to have been absolutely crucial for the German economic revival in the 1930s that helped keep the Nazis in power, helped keep them in business. He was much more then, he also became Minister for Economics, so he was much more powerful than, say, a central banker is nowadays who's just controlling monetary policy. He was really the guy running the Nazi economy, which is why after the war he was put on trial for war crimes. And so the BIS had a stronger and stronger German presence. Other bankers, German bankers that joined the BIS were Schacht's successor, a guy, Walter Funk, who was the president of the Reichsbank. His vice president, Emil Pohl, was also a director of the BIS. A private banker called Kurt von Schroeder, in whose house one of the crucial meetings took place that helped bring Hitler to power, and a man called Hermann Schmitz, who was the chief executive officer of IG Farben, which was the main Nazi industrial and chemical conglomerate. And IG Farben ran its own concentration camp at Auschwitz, and also manufactured Zyklon B, the gas that was used to kill several million Jews. So during the war, the BIS became a very important part of the Nazi economy, and it was kind of its bridge to the world in many ways. It was so important for the Germans that Emil Pohl, the vice president of the Reichsbank, who was also a BIS director, said the BIS is the only real foreign branch of the Reichsbank. So who's running the BIS during the war? And this is where the story gets really interesting.